What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football, sports betting, and NASCAR home here at fakepigskin.com. I am your host, Kyle Robert. You follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me once again is Brian Twining. Obviously, Brian, we have some stuff to talk today. We kind of thought maybe it'd be a little monotonous over the next couple weeks until we really get into it. But the Chiefs didn't want to do that. The Bucs didn't want to do that. And our running back rankings didn't want to do that. So before we jump into all that, how's everything going with you?
Everything's good, man. It's exciting to see all this NFL news getting going here. That just means that we're that much closer to the season starting, and we've got the NBA tipping off tonight, and the NHL starting this weekend.
We have
sports
hockey,
are back.
Basketball, baseball, NASCAR, MMA, like literally everything but football. And then football's like, hold my beer, because we're going to give you some news to talk about. Before we dive into all that, make sure you mash that thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe. All of our new subscribers, thank you for hopping on. Thank you for enjoying this ride with us. We're going to hopefully help take you to a fantasy championships. If you like NASCAR, if you like sports betting, hopefully we'll put some green in your pocket. All from a theoretical perspective, of course. But Brian, the fantasy football world has exploded. Everybody's, I'm sure, heard by now. Damian Williams has decided to opt out for the 2020 season. And the Clyde Edwards-Helaire bandwagon that was already full speed ahead downhill just hit the NOS and took off. I guess in terms of like, let's talk in reality, and then we could talk about like the stuff that's happening. Because like there's been some dynasty trades, which we'll have to talk about because the change in terms of dynasty is very minimal. But this was a guy that was already getting going third round. We felt like Damian Williams was going to be a value in 8th, 9th, 10th round, wherever you were getting him. Clearly, at this point, with Damian Williams opted out, at this point, the Clyde Edwards-Helaire bandwagon is only getting stronger. In terms of where you think he'll be drafted and where the fantasy community as a whole is going to come in on this, where is your head at, and kind of what are you expecting for upcoming drafts?
I mean, just to begin, this was the first domino to fall in the NFL as far as the rumored amount of people with high-profile names that are going to be opting out. So I don't think this is going to be the first guy that sees this kind of fantasy impact. But going to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you know, his stock was already continuing to rise. We saw him in the third round ADP, sometimes in that late second. And we spoke previously about how that was just too costly for a guy who was likely to be, you know, sharing reps. But now he's, at the moment, literally the only guy there who really has fantasy stock value. I mean, they have DeAndre Washington, but I mean, we haven't really seen much out of him during his time with the Raiders. So coming into a different scheme and all that, I doubt he would have much impact. So Edwards-Helaire, for me, I can see him going now, you know, mid-first, coming off the board as if somebody really likes him as even that third running back right after, you know, Christian McCaffrey, clearly the number one guy, and then whoever you're taking second, Kamara, Zeke, Barkley, whatever. But I see him going in the top 5 picks in some drafts now.
Yeah, especially in PPR formats or half PPR, I think that's definitely in play. I think in almost every draft, he'll go somewhere in that end of the first, very early part of the second is probably the latest you'll be able to snag him. Like maybe if you have pick 12 or 13, or I mean, I guess 11 or 12, maybe you can get him on the wraparound. It doesn't feel likely, especially in any format that rewards pass catching. In terms of the Chiefs' backfield, I'm a little more optimistic on DeAndre Washington. I think there's something there. Like, I don't know that I'm necessarily, putting any real value on him, but he's definitely somebody in dynasty leagues. If he's still floating around, I'm looking at in deeper redraft leagues. I'm definitely looking at, like, we were drafting best balls. We were drafting some of these like 18 to 20 round, like Scott Fishbowl. He's somebody that I might take a shot on if when Fab opens up. There's going to be value. Darwin Thompson truthers are crawling out from under rocks, and that's just not happening. I still think there's a non-zero chance that we're talking about Devonta Freeman. Obviously, we'll talk the Lashawn McCoy to Tampa Bay news. Maybe they go make a trade for somebody else. Like Andy Reid, like I feel like he's really comfortable. Obviously, first round pick. They love Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Getting the Brian Westbrook comps. There's a lot to like there. But I still think he's going to want to get a little more depth, a little more reliability. And maybe that's something that comes in the first couple of weeks of the season or midseason like they did with Lashawn McCoy. But as we mentioned, go ahead.
I think it's highly likely that they do go out and continue to negotiate with Devonta Freeman because he seems to fit what the Chiefs want to do. He's a really skilled pass catching back. He's smaller of stature. He's similar size to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He's not. I don't think he's as stocky as Helaire is. But I think he would fit the scheme really well, and it would give Andy Reid that veteran presence that would be able to kind of mentor CEH going into this season.
Sure. So let's dive in. Let's talk our top 12 running backs, and we'll kind of run through it all. We're talking top 12. I think, at least for me personally, I feel like there's a probably top 4 that I'm really comfortable with. There's no doubt in my mind, no matter the format. I'm not taking Clyde Edwards-Helaire over, and that's McCaffrey, Zeke, Saquon, and Alvin Kamara. I think those 4 guys in some order, however you want to order it. Obviously, if you want to have somebody else, like I feel like those 4 are lock solid as my top 4 running backs. And then after that, I think is where the legit discussion comes into play in terms of where I'm actually comfortable taking Helaire.
Yeah, no doubt. Because you and I, we both have the same 4 guys in the top 4, just in a little bit of a different order. But then after that, that's when you start to get into the muddled, the Joe Mixons, the Dalvin Cooks. Where does CEH fall in that group? Josh Jacobs with the rumblings that they're going to involve him in the passing game a little bit more.
Those are the same rumblings we heard last year that never really came to fruition.
Yeah, so there's a lot to be had there.
So let's start with a couple of those names. Dalvin Cook. Obviously, we both sang the praises of Alexander Mattison. Dalvin Cook's a guy that has missed time. But at his peak, at what he can be, he could be the RB1 in fantasy. So I guess how much of a concern would you have taking, say, Dalvin over CEH? Like clearly, we've never seen Edwards-Helaire play. So like trying to kind of fit him into a mold, but like we know his skill set and we know how dynamic this offense can be. And if he's getting scoring opportunities, if he's going to be involved in the passing game, in half or full, there's a legit discussion there. I don't know if I can get there, but I feel like it's worth having the talk.
Yeah, I'll just lead it off with it. Even though I talk about I'm not afraid of taking risks in fantasy football. One thing I'm not a huge fan of is just jumping on the bandwagon of rookies coming into their first year, even on as good of an offense as the Chiefs are. Like I just don't envision them giving him 100% of the reps and every single time just trusting him with the ball. Yeah. As much as we'd like to see him and to kind of warrant that top 5 running back pick, I would much rather take Dalvin Cook, who he is that home run hitter. One thing that Edwards-Helaire is not. Dalvin Cook can take it to the house on pretty much any run. Mm-hmm. Health be besides the point. If he is healthy, which you can never predict injuries, like you said, he could be the RB1 with the amount of running that Minnesota does, even with the presence of Alexander Mattison.
Yeah. And see, like in my head, I could see a world where I take Edwards-Helaire and then I grab Alexander Mattison in like the 7th, 8th round. And then I try and get a couple of those pieces where if I take Dalvin, I'm probably not taking Mattison. I'm not a huge fan of that handcuff strategy. Yeah. Obviously, like I want the upside. So like that's the Browns backfield's another one that comes to mind, kind of like that, where in a vacuum, I'd probably rather have Nick Chubb. But when I think about the fact that Kareem Hunt's there and there's a chance that that's more 60-40, that Kareem Hunt takes over that backfield, that he's more involved in the passing game, that, you know, Chubb gets hurt and Kareem Hunt takes, like, there's so many paths to Kareem Hunt being a big part of that offense that I like the idea, especially if it's like we're talking like PPR. Like, I'd much rather take Edwards-Helaire and then grab Kareem Hunt in, you know, a 5th or 6th or 7th round, and kind of build my team that way. So that is another thing that I'm kind of like, sure, in a vacuum, if I get these two players and you're telling me I get 16 games, there's going to be a little bit of a, well, obviously I'm going to go with the veteran, but with some of the other stuff that's kind of built in, I'm still like, you'll see our rankings here in a second, but like, I'd still take Dalvin, I still take Chubb, but from a draft strategy perspective, I wonder if I would think that, knowing that I'm going to hopefully get some of these pieces later in my draft.
Well, considering you and I are kind of similar in the way that we like the draft and we kind of lean towards that 0 RB mentality, unless I'm getting one of those top 4 guys like that we spoke about, I'm probably skipping over the next handful of guys, looking for the really valuable handcuffs that I can get later, like a Madison, like a Kareem Hunt, because then you can load up on all those really good wide receivers, which kind of lends to, dependent on how much of how feverish Clyde Edwards-Helaire's skyrocketing amongst the ADP is, he could be a guy, you know, in the early 2nd that I would maybe take a peek at. But yeah, it's, as far as just overall fantasy ranking, I don't see him passing the guys like Dalvin Cook. Yeah.
And so that's the thing. Like, if he was kind of already priced up as a guy who could be the future starter, maybe his actual ADP doesn't spike that much. But based upon the trades I've seen and stuff, I just feel like he's going to be end of the first round at like a minimum. And it's just not going to be something I want. And, you know, as we've talked 0 RB, like, I've been doing some research. It's funny how 0 RB kind of goes and comes with how the receivers and running backs, like last year, we had no running backs that did that. Like, every running back drafted in the top 12 at running back played at least 10 games. That has never happened going all the way back to 2010. We're usually at least 3 guys. Going back to 2010, it's at least 2 guys who don't play at least 10 games. So there's a lot more volatility. And when
that's a warning for this year.
And when receivers are injury prone and have down seasons and don't live up like last year. Last year was an anomaly, but people really remember exactly what they were like saw last. And so, like, this is the year to use 0 RB because everyone's like, no, running backs are great. There's so many of them. They're locked and loaded. There's no injury concerns. Like, they're all thinking, oh, this is it. And then all these receivers are just getting hurt in their new offenses, and who knows what's going to happen. That's when you lock in. Like, if you can double tap Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams, Michael Thomas, Julio Jones, Michael Thomas, or even Julio Jones, DeAndre Hopkins, I think you're going to be loving life. And then you get some of the guys we like. But running backs are key. Running backs are something. And like we mentioned, if we're talking about McCaffrey, if we're talking about Zeke, even in Saquon, I'm probably taking those guys. But beyond them, I'm not sure I can get there. All right, so let's throw up our rankings and take a look at where we are and some of the differences we might have. So obviously, as Brian mentioned, McCaffrey, Zeke, Saquon, Kamara, same order or same players, a slightly different order. Obviously, you're a little higher on Kamara. Kamara's a guy that I've actually come around a little bit more. He was more like 6'7", I think, when we talked back in March, probably when we did our initial top 12. He's gonna be so. I know it's all like every day feels like March. We're just stuck in
the Groundhog's Day now.
Yeah, exactly. So those 4 guys in some order. and then Mixon Cook Chubb for me, and then Cook Mixon Jacobs Chubb for you. So I guess Jacobs, he's another guy I really liked, and I was happy to take kind of at that back end of the first, early part of the second. Are you expecting at least some of the passing work that they're supposed to be giving him?
I have to expect them to increase his usage in the passing game. I just don't see a world where they don't try to get their best player on the field more often than not and give just another weapon out of the backfield for Derek Carr. They still have Jalen Richard, but
yeah. I guess my concern is they added Bryan Edwards, they added Henry Ruggs, they added Lynn Bowden, who I think could be like technically a running back that they use out of the backfield. They also added Nelson Aguilar, who can't catch, but
it just asked Eagles fans about that.
But there seems to be a kind of progress to potentially throwing a little bit more. So I'm curious to see how that works and how, if even if they're throwing the same amount, if Derek Carr, if they added all these weapons, how they're going to divvy up targets. But I'm with you. Like we're nitpicking. I think he definitely belongs in that top 10 conversation.
Just for Jacobs, though, just the sheer amount of volume that he's going to see with carrying the ball, I think that's why I have him ranked so high. Just the fact that he is their pretty much only option out of the backfield to run the ball, and John Gruden is going to want to run the ball to protect his quarterback and stay in games and that kind of stuff. So I think that's why I'm really high on Jacobs.
Yep, and I think that's totally fair. I think that's why I have Fournette in my top 12, and I notice you don't. This is a guy that last year had 12 games inside the top 25 at running back. He had 8 games, but he only had one top 12 game. So that is interesting to me. Like, he was a consistent RB2, not a consistent RB1. I still think the volume's going to be there. Derrick Henry's another guy. Obviously, like, I've made my case at how I feel about him. But his potential and his upside in an offense that wants to use him a ton, I get it. Let's talk Aaron Jones, because he didn't even make my top 12, and that's I feel stupid doing that after last year. But
we've talked about it before. There's no possible way he's going to come even close to reaching the same amount of touchdowns that he did.
Right. And if his touchdown regression, there's obviously they brought in AJ Dillon. There's rumblings that Aaron Rodgers could be a name that we're talking about as a guy sitting out the 2020 season. An older quarterback, proven a lot, doesn't want to deal with a lot of nonsense. I could see him being like, "Nah, I'm good." You guys already
could you imagine?
You guys already drafted Jordan Love. Let the kid get some work, and I'll find a new home starting 2021. I mean, probably not the news Packer fans want to hear, but if we're sitting here, in early August talking about that, I wouldn't be shocked in the slightest. I am curious to see if a few names pop up like that. I was proud of us to both put Austin Eckler. Like, I don't think Austin Eckler gets enough love. Like, even in 2018, when he was splitting time with Melvin Gordon, he had 8 weeks where he was a top 25 option in standard format. So it doesn't even take his pass catching into account. He had 14 instances of that last year. He had 6 games as an RB1. I know there's concerns, and obviously, like, that offense could not be good, but they could also have Tyrod running this show with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and Hunter Henry, and it could be a little bit better than we expect. And I think in standard and especially in any version of PPR, I think Austin Eckler needs a little more love, and I'm happy to see that we're both giving it to him.
Yeah, Austin Eckler was a guy that I was kind of teetering on the edge of top 12, kind of leading into this, like early in March. He was a guy who I had a really tough time ranking. But just with the news coming out of, I almost called them San Diego, LA, with the expectation is that Tyrod is going to start, and that just kind of goes to what I've been kind of preaching, is that with Anthony Lynn there and Tyrod Taylor, a guy who he had in Buffalo, and Lynn, while he was the OC with the Bills, they had a top 10 rushing team every year that he was there. And I see them kind of leaning on that ground game. And Austin Eckler is their most dynamic player out of the backfield. Justin Jackson is okay. That kid they drafted, who, we don't really know what we're going to see out of him, out of UCLA, Kelly. So, Eckler is by far for them. He's going to be option 1A and 1B in that offense if they're running that similar style that they did in Buffalo. So I see him getting, a healthy amount of touches each week. Mm-hmm. Now, is that going to translate into touchdowns? We don't really know, but that's not a predictable stat really. So I'm going towards the touches, and that's why he's in my top 12.
Yeah. So the only running backs that had more top 25 weeks last year than Austin Eckler were Ezekiel Elliott and Christian McCaffrey. The only running backs that had more top 12 weeks at the position than Austin Eckler were Dalvin Cook and Christian McCaffrey. So that says a lot about a running back that, people don't think of as much. And this is standard again. This is like not even taking his passing work. If you add in his passing work, he's only going to be higher. He's only going to be stacking up more points. And I know there's concern about that offense, but the volume shouldn't be a problem. They should be able to score plenty. And be better than I think people think. I like seeing Miles Sanders on your list. The guys that just missed the cut for me are Miles Sanders and Aaron Jones, and Miles Sanders with the Doug Peterson effect. If you go to fakepigskin.com, I wrote up about Boston Scott, who I think Doug Peterson gives his RB2 and RB3 consistently 7 to 10 touches per game. So that's already cut into Miles Sanders. Then Boston Scott, I'm hoping he gets most, if not all of that, so you can play him as a 0 RB target, and then potentially have the upside of him taking over in this role. I love Miles Sanders. I'm happy. He's going to be one of the biggest offshoots from the Clyde Edwards-Helaire news, because I feel like he was a guy that was kind of going in that end of the first, early second. I think this is going to solidify him as a second-round pick.
Which, for me, I think is kind of where his rightful place is right towards that end of the RB1 conversation, because of the situation with Doug Peterson and his inability to just choose a guy. Mm-hmm. But Miles Sanders has all the tools to be a guy that at the end of the season, we're talking about a top 5 finish for an Eagles offense who should be more consistent than they were last year. As long as Carson Wentz stays fully healthy, they've revamped the receiving core. Miles Sanders for me, he was another guy kind of like Austin Eckler, where I was a little down on him coming in just with the whole Doug Peterson being his head coach thing. But I look back at it, and his athletic ability, and he's proven that he is a guy that could put up consistent top 12 numbers at the position.
Yeah, honestly, the Eagles offense, maybe it's not the Chiefs, but if it could be 80 or 90%, and Miles Sanders could be, getting just as much, if not more work than Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And in an offense that obviously Goddard and Ertz are there, the receiving core is dismantled. So Jalen Reagor buzz is going, which I'm not super happy about, because I was hoping to steal him in some drafts, but it seems like that might have to pay a little bit more. But the opportunity for him to be higher priority in the offense, I think, is there, even if Boston Scott cuts in. So there's a legit discussion, because if you're buying Clyde Edwards-Helaire at, say, the back end of the first, say you're getting him 10, 11, 12, whatever it is, and you can get Miles Sanders round 2, mid round 2, maybe the end of round 2. If we're talking about value and two players who have just as much, Sanders probably has more, just from what we've seen, what this offense could be and where he sacks. Maybe we shouldn't be drafting Edwards-Helaire at all, because if you're drafting him as the 7th to 10th player in the first round, you're kind of like you need him to be like, unless he turns into Christian McCaffrey in year one, which I mean, I guess is like a 0.2%. Like there's not a chance that he does that. Just because I think he is that talented and in this offense. But like, you need him to be what you expect at that price. There's no opportunity for growth. Where if you got him in the third round and he becomes the RB1 that we think he can be, then you're getting profit, and that's how you win fantasy leagues. But if you're buying at the peak price, like you're overpaying, and he has to live up to that value. Now, if you're certain that he's going to be that guy, and you don't care, like by all means draft him. I won't be that person.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've talked about this. In that offense, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't matter what the guy's name is. Whoever is the starting running back for the Kansas City Chiefs is more than likely going to be top 12 off the board. It's just
and I think because of that first round price tag, I think because of the Brian Westbrook comps, I think it boosted him a little bit. And and like, as much as we love Damian Williams, this is a guy that was kind of floundering mediocrity, and then Andy Reid got his hands on him and turned him into a valuable player. So, what is he talented? Of course, but is he elite running back talented? It's hard to say.
Well, to that point, I mean, last year at this time we were talking about Damian Williams going, he was top 7 running back off the board. Like, people had lost their minds over a guy who was a career backup just because he played behind Patrick Mahomes. So
that's very true.
I mean, with Edwards-Helaire being a rookie, I mean, no offense to him, he was great at LSU, but this is not LSU. This is the NFL. So,
yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Brian and I will continue to update rankings. We'll try and get as much of that up on Fake Pigskin as we can. Before we get out of here, let's talk about our boy Rojo, because the Bucks signed Lashawn McCoy. Obviously a 1-year deal. Obviously had moments in Kansas City. I'm really curious to see if this is just a depth thing, if this is Keyshawn Vaughn might not be ready for the spotlight, and everyone who's overdrafting him.
He also got placed on the COVID list too. So
yeah. And so we'll see. I'm really curious to see kind of what we're looking at in terms of turnaround times for some of that stuff. Yeah. Obviously, if you test positive and you're not showing symptoms, you can still hold you out. If you test positive and you have symptoms, then maybe it's a longer recovery. And then, if he's already starting behind the 8 ball, maybe that's why they're bringing in the depth. Maybe it's hey, we're bringing you in. There's no guarantee you're actually going to be playing or make the team. If if we're not going to play you, then we'll cut you. But we want to make sure we have depth in case Vaughn's not ready, in case Rojo doesn't kind of keep progressing. But in terms of value for us, I think this might help us if we're staying strong with our Rojo feelings, our Rojo hype train. And if we can get a couple rounds of extra value, I think that's going to be a good thing for us.
So that was my initial reaction to the signing of them getting McCoy. It wasn't like, oh crap, Rojo lost his job or there's no chance. It was actually, this is great for us Rojo truthers, because people are going to now discount him with the addition of Lashawn McCoy, who I've seen a few people mention it. He was a healthy scratch for the Super Bowl. So let's not act like this is the same Shady from 2013 who was rushing for 1,400 yards, double-digit touchdowns. He is a shell of his former self. And I have a feeling that, like you said, he might have been brought in for depth to maybe because of Keyshawn Vaughn, or just to kind of be a teacher over this training camp and just be there for that emergency running back if one of those two guys were to go out.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a world where Lashawn McCoy is basically James White plus, and he just kind of runs his backfield, and for an offense that wants to be up tempo and move and kind of have a consistent pass catcher. But I still like Rojo. I still think there's a lot to like there. And I think he can be that guy. So we're obviously going to be drafting him where we can. And if we're in the same league, we're going to be probably drafting him around or two too high, but that's okay.
That's all right. I want to be on the right end of that.
Exactly. But as someone who owns McCoy in a couple dynasty leagues, I am interested to see where this goes. I feel like he's a guy that I might try and see if I can get someone to bite and move. Speaking of dynasties, let's talk about this real quick before we get out of here. I don't know if you guys have seen some of the deals going down. Obviously, Twitter is a buzz. But like the idea that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is worth so much more in dynasty leagues, it doesn't make sense to me. Like Clyde Edwards-Helaire for Jonathan Taylor in a 2021.
That's ridiculous.
Let's see here. Clyde Edwards-Helaire. This is one that this doesn't seem real. But I also know the hype train can get going and people are dumb. AJ Brown, Jonathan Taylor, and 2 firsts for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. That feels way too aggressive, and probably not real. Here's
I was gonna say that one's way too pricey.
Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Justin Jefferson for Tyreek and Jonathan Taylor. Give me Tyreek and Jonathan Taylor all day long. Clyde Edwards-Helaire for DeAndre Swift and AJ Brown, taking the package all day long.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And quite possibly my favorite trade if you're trading away Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Noah Fant for George Kittle and Alvin Kamara. Can you imagine saying yes to that? Can you imagine saying yes to that? Like, I'll give Kamara and Kittle, the potential RB1 and tight end 1 for I love Noah Fant. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire can be very good. But like imagine saying yes to that. Like if you own a Clyde Edwards-Helaire, like whatever you think it's worth, like add like 3 players and send out some trade offers. Because if you just get one fish to bite, you set yourself up for the next 3 seasons.
That to me is an absolute steal. George Kittle hitting his prime.
Yeah,
you got.
That's what I'm saying. Like it's not like we're talking about Gronk and like Lashawn McCoy, like guys on their way out. Like we're talking about prime young assets that have 3 to 5 years of being elite, and help lead you to fantasy championships. I'll never understand that deal.
For the first running back taken in the first round, who wouldn't be this talked about if he wasn't taken by the Chiefs. So let's remember that as well.
And the other thing is, like, I love Edwards-Helaire, but if the Chiefs had taken DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor, J.K. Dobbins,
all of them would be.
We'd be having the same conversation. Just replace the running back's name. Like, it would be the same ADP, be the same hype train. Like that feels aggressive to me. But I'm really curious to see over the next couple weeks how his ADP shifts, how it settles, if people are still pulling off these amazing dynasty trades. So we will be back. If you enjoyed our content, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple or iTunes or Stitcher, Spotify, make sure you're subscribed to the show there. Anywhere you can leave a review, I believe just Stitcher and Apple Podcasts. Please do that. Even if you don't listen to it there, if you have an account and you can go do that, that would be huge for us. Tell your friends about the show. I know we might be giving out some trade secrets, but spread us around, helps keep us going, and helps keeping us bringing you content all season long. So for Brian Twining, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you guys next time.
Peace.